Here we are in mid-October and the growing season is basically over, so it's time for an update on broadleaf evergreens and how they performed during the summer. First up we have a rhododendron. I don't know what the cultivar is, but it did pretty well this summer. This is a mostly shady location on a slope, but it gets plenty of morning sun, and it's still relatively small. It did survive the extreme cold last winter and put on new growth this summer, so hopefully it will continue to do well. So rhododendron is good so far. Here's a pieris that I planted this spring, and it put on some growth and did very well in a partly shady location. So far so good for the pieris. I did have another pieris in the ground last winter that died from the cold, so this one I guess is a little bit experimental. Here's another Alyssium parviflorum. I've talked about these a lot. It put on pretty good growth this summer, probably approaching 1 foot vertical. Very positive on the Alyssium parviflorum. And here's the Alyssium floridanum, also doing very well. Didn't put on too much growth vertical, but it was the first year in the ground, so the real test will be this winter on the Alyssium floridanum. Magnolia virginiana, sweet bay magnolia, still performing very well. I highly recommend it, especially if you have slightly wetter locations. Very fast growing, very tall growing tree. Kind of goes up into the stratosphere here. So I definitely will be planting more of the Magnolia virginiana. One more shot of a different Magnolia virginiana. This one, the leaves are a little bit more oblong. I think the cultivar name was something like Silver Mist or something. I don't have it memorized, but it came from wilsonbrothersgardens.com. And I picked it because it was the most cold hardy variety. This is the Trochodendron aurelioides. It survived the -4 temperatures and leafed back out this spring. So if you can find it, Trochodendron is good. This is the Osmanthus, Fortune's Cold Hardy Hybrid. And this came from wilsonbrothersgardens.com, and it was frozen back to the ground, and it has since resprouted and sent up these long lanky shoots. And next spring I'll pick one to be the sole survivor and trim away the rest. This is the mountain laurel, Kalmia latifolia. This particular cultivar is minuet, and I'm looking for a way to get some better cultivars of mountain laurel that are not dwarf like this. But so far this one has shown remarkable resilience. It was in the ground during the extreme cold, and it survived the summer as well. So maybe mountain laurel is another good option for a broadleaf evergreen. This is a pyracantha that I thought was dead, actually. It had been frozen back to just stumps earlier in the year because of the cold, and it's since put on, I guess must be close to 2 feet vertical growth. I'm probably going to clean it up during the winter and trim away any secondary leaders just to have a single vertical leader. But I just kind of let it grow wild this summer so that it could provide as much nutrients to the roots as possible going into winter. And I probably won't trim it until the spring, but pyracantha has shown remarkable resilience even after being basically frozen back to the ground. Here's another broadleaf evergreen that was frozen back to the ground, and that is the Liberty holly. And you can see it's basically sprouting from the ground there, and I've just kind of been letting it grow on its own to recover. Haven't really done any maintenance around it because I didn't know if it was going to survive or not, but it did. Made it through the summer and put on, I guess that must be about 3 feet of vertical growth in 1 year, which is only possible because it has a much larger root system underneath. It was supporting the much larger holly before the entire top side was frozen back. So one lesson to be learned: if they do get frozen back and they have a huge root system, they can bounce back pretty rapidly. In this case, it's one vertical spike. We'll see if it puts on side branches next year. And let's take a look at the Edith Bogue Southern Magnolia. Still having some kind of problem, although the newer growth looks better. Knock on wood. It's definitely suffering from some sort of leaf blight. I don't know what kind. Let's see if I focus there. There we go. Looks pretty nasty on the surface, but I'm just gonna leave it and see what happens, because I'm looking for trees that can survive whatever Tennessee throws at them, including leaf blight. So I think it'll outgrow it, and we'll just find out. Leaf blight on the surface, and there's no doubt the roots are being attacked by Armillaria below, so we're putting the Edith Bogue Magnolia through its paces, for sure. A true test. Savannah Holly here, hybrid. For those keeping track, it is the Ilex opaca crossed with Ilex cassine. Some sort of leaf blight action going on here too on the Savannah Holly. But once again, we'll let it take its course and see what it can do. Forgot to tell you, the Liberty Holly is a hybrid between Ilex latifolia, Ilex perni, and Ilex cornuta, I believe. And this is the China Girl Holly, maybe China Boy, not sure. Purchased from Lowe's. It's a hybrid between Ilex cornuta and Ilex rugosa. So those are both Asian hollies, with the rugosa providing the extreme cold hardiness. Still relatively small, but seem to have survived the summer just fine. Interesting leaf texture. They're relatively small, kind of almost squarish leaves with a curl to them. And I'm going to be really curious to see the form of growth next summer if it goes vertical. Here's the Nellie Stevens Holly. Bounced back from a little bit of frost damage during the extreme cold and went on to put on, looks like 2 feet vertical growth this summer. Haven't really done much maintenance around it, but I will clean it up here when we get into some colder weather. And I'm going to be putting rock down around all of these next year, so I won't have to worry about trimming grass. I may show you my little rock project at the end of this video. By the way, Nellie Stevens is Ilex cornuta and Ilex aquifolium. Had to think about that for a second. English holly and Chinese holly hybrid. Here's the southern wax myrtle. Very impressive. Its ability to put on growth is not really rivaled by many other broadleaf evergreens. Vertical, it must have put on 4 feet, and that's with me cutting the top out of it. So I may have mentioned this in another video, but southern wax myrtle is either going to be the biggest win or the most spectacular failure in the broadleaf evergreen collection. It's well known to have extremely weak wood and to be very damaged by ice storms. So I'm trying to keep it trimmed back. You can see here where I've cut the top out of it, and then it went on to vigorously outgrow that with these long spikes going up in the air. So I don't know. I'm just going to keep trimming it to try to restrain the wild growth of the southern wax myrtle. Myrica cerifera is the Latin name, and it's an amazing broadleaf evergreen. Very fragrant if you crush up the leaf. Kind of oblong, not really shiny. Well, they're a little bit shiny when they're wet. It's been raining out here. Saw a lot of these growing at Universal Orlando last year, which made me think I made a big mistake by planting it all the way up in Tennessee. But even after it lost all of its leaves in the extreme cold, it did leaf back out and put on incredible growth in the summer. So maybe it's just one of those trees that can bounce back rapidly. We'll find out. The jury's still out, but if you want to try one and see what happens in your yard in Tennessee, I say go for it. Here's the Carolina laurel, Prunus caroliniana. Did very well this summer. Not really sure how much vertical, maybe 1.5 feet. Seems to be low maintenance, and I have seen some very large specimens growing in Tennessee, so I have high hopes for the Carolina laurel. I think you can still find them online. Forestfarm.com might have them. Here's the oak leaf, or Oakland holly, as it's sometimes called, and it's put on a lot of vertical spikes, which I will select one to be the leader and trim away the others. So it probably put 1 foot vertical this summer. It was not in the ground during the extreme cold. I think they were damaged by that. And the Dragon Lady holly has also bounced back after the extreme cold, putting on, I guess, 1 foot or more vertical. Once again, extreme vertical spikes with no side branches. I will pick one to be the leader and trim the rest. By the way, Dragon Lady, I believe, is Ilex cornuta and Ilex perni. And I think Oakland holly is Ilex perni and Ilex latifolia. Maybe something else. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. American holly is doing pretty well. Ilex opaca. Didn't put on too much growth. And this is the Christmas jewel holly, another Ilex cornuta hybrid, I believe. Probably put on about 9 inches of vertical growth. This is the Dahoon holly, Ilex cassine. Must have put on 1 foot of vertical growth, and it was in the ground during the extreme cold. There don't appear to be many problems with tip blight. Well, there's a little there, some sort of leaf blight. But overall it seems to be doing well. You can find these on shop.arborday.org if you want to try a Dahoon holly. And considering how well it did during the extreme cold last year, I highly recommend it. This is an Elaeagnus pungens that I purchased from wilsonbrothersgardens.com, and I thought it was dead after the cold. All the leaves were gone, but it since leafed back out and put on, I guess, about over 1 foot of vertical growth. So I'm still fairly positive on Elaeagnus, although I may have to move this because I recently found out that they are susceptible to armillaria, and I've got it in a spot that is close to armillaria, so gonna have to do something about that. I still think it's a neat broadleaf evergreen though, especially the silverish bronze color of some of the new foliage. This one I don't have in the ground yet. It's still in a pot, but I will put it in the ground, and that is the Castle Wall. No, wait, take it back. This is the Blue Prince holly, hybrid between Ilex aquifolium and Ilex rugosa, and it had to spend the summer in a pot in a semi-shady area, and it's done pretty well so far. So looking forward to getting this one in the ground. Another one not planted yet, the Foster's holly, a hybrid between Ilex aquifolium and Ilex cassine as well, similar to the Savannah holly. And while it was waiting to be planted, it was waiting all summer in a pot, it did manage to put on about 1.5 feet of vertical growth. So this is going to be a real tree when it gets in the ground. This is the Screenplay holly. I want to say I ordered this from naturehills.com. And it's kind of an experiment. It's a hybrid between Ilex latifolia and Ilex integra. So its frost hardiness is questionable at best in Tennessee. But it did put on about 1 foot of vertical growth while it was waiting to be planted in a pot. And I have several hollies that I purchased late last spring, while they were available online, but it just wasn't possible to plant them. And I'm glad I didn't, because it turned out to be a pretty hot summer near the end. Sometimes you just have to buy things when they're available and then wait a while to get them in the ground. But the Screenplay holly did pretty well. This is a Yupon holly, Ilex vomitoria, and we had a little bit of cold weather recently. Someone said it even frosted in the Nashville suburbs, and I'm noticing a purple to maybe brown tint creeping into the tips of the leaves. Yupon holly is more of a deep south type holly. I saw it growing wild on the coast of Alabama this May when I was there. So if this gets severely damaged by frost in October and November, I'm not even going to put it in the ground because it's just not hardy enough. But it did spend the summer waiting in a pot and put on about a foot of vertical growth. So the jury is still out on whether or not I will make the effort to put this in the ground. This is another Ilex aquifolium, Ilex rugosa hybrid. I think it's either Blue Steed or Blue Stallion, one of the two. Doesn't really matter what the marketing name is. The species is what really matters in my opinion. So it is Ilex aquifolium, Ilex rugosa. Waiting to go in the ground, but extreme cold hardiness is its #1 feature. So I'm looking forward to seeing how it will do this winter. This may look like a weed, but it is an evergreen bush honeysuckle, Lonicera nitida, and it's just getting started, fairly low to the ground still, but I'm going to try to turn it into a proper vertical bush through a combination of staking and pruning. We'll see what happens, but I was looking for a honeysuckle that is evergreen because plants in the Lonicera genus are supposed to be relatively resistant to root rot, which, as you know, is a problem around here. Okay, here's a Prague viburnum, and it is a hybrid between Viburnum ratidophyllum and Viburnum utile, which are both Chinese viburnums. This one is evergreen. It lost a few leaves during the extreme cold, but not many, and then put on a lot of growth this summer, although I'm not as pleased with the growth habit because there's not really much verticality. I may have to stake some stuff up and do some trimming after the growing season is over, but I just wanted it to grow as much as possible in every direction and strengthen the roots. But I'm still relatively positive on the Prague viburnum, although it is supposed to be extremely susceptible to armillaria, so I'm going to have to be careful where I plant them. And here's a pyracantha that put on a ridiculous amount of growth this summer. Probably expanded from being almost a tiny twig to 4 feet in diameter. And I staked up one branch to try to establish a vertical leader. And now it's over 4 feet tall. So incredible growth on the pyracantha. I'm very curious to see how the leaves perform during a normal winter. Last winter was abnormal and all of the leaves were frozen off, but the pyracanthas did bounce back. And I want to see just how evergreen they are during a normal winter. So hoping for normal this year. And here's another Elaeagnus pungens doing pretty well. No real worries about this one surviving. They're pretty tough plants. So we'll see what happens. This is the Centennial Girl Holly, which I believe is a hybrid between Ilex cornuta and Ilex centrochinensis. Or maybe it's Ilex perni and centrochinensis. Either way, it was frozen back to the ground completely by last year's -4 and resprouted and put on, I guess, over a foot of vertical growth with several different leaders. You can still see the main leader there where it got cut back to the ground. I'll pick one of these side leaders and make it the new vertical leader next spring. But this year I just kind of let it grow wild to provide nutrients to the extensive root system down below, because it was larger before it got frozen. I don't know if I've really shown this one much yet. It is the Portuguese laurel, Prunus lusitanica, purchased from coniferkingdom.com. I don't know if they have any left or not, but it did very well this summer. Mostly sun location, and you can see I've got it in this area where I have rock surrounding it, so no real competition from weeds at all. I'm satisfied with the growth so far, relatively vertical. I'm just going to let it keep growing, and maybe after next summer's growing season trim it a little, but I'm satisfied with the verticality so far. This is the Castle Wall Holly, and I think this is also an Ilex rugosa, Ilex aquifolium hybrid, but I may have to double check. I'll just say that for now. This one was not in the ground during the extreme cold, but it is supposed to be very cold hardy. So Castle Wall Holly, it didn't put on much growth this year because it was the first year in the ground, so also going to be curious to see how fast this can grow. And you notice I have the rocks around it. A little worried about my new rock strategy. I have so many trees in my collection that it's really hard to trim the grass around them, and I never even bothered putting down mulch because that would have been insane, really. For a couple reasons, I didn't want to put that much organic matter over the top of the roots because I want water to pass through to the trees, and I already have a problem with fungus, so I didn't want to give it a bunch of dead wood to grow into either. So I started off with a plan to put down river pebbles, or almost like larger size pea gravel, and cover that with these large gray stones. And I did that in my kind of shade garden area where at the time it was mostly shady, but it didn't work so well because a bunch of dandelions and other things started cropping up in the holes between the large gray stones, and the pea gravel provided no weed prevention whatsoever because it's just so small the plants can move it out of the way as they grow. So I needed a larger bottom layer, and I chose the egg rock from Lowe's. The only problem with that is that it's relatively dark brown, and that's going to trap too much of the sun's heat and make the roots hot. And I want to keep the roots cool. So I got the idea to overlay that with the white marble from Lowe's, and that is pretty white, but there's still some gray mixed in. So I'm overlaying that with the super white polished stone. Hold on, let me find the name. Okay, it's a Wonderland brand. Waikiki white is the color. You can't see it because the label's faded, but basically it's a much whiter polished white that's going to be more reflective. And the idea here is to reflect as much of the sun's energy as possible away from the ground using white stones, and also prevent weed growth with this triple layer of rock that is too heavy for the plants to push up through. So far it's been very effective. Next summer will be a real test. There's one spot here where a few little blades of grass or spring onion or something tried to come up through, and I'm trying one other little thing as kind of a firefighting approach, and that is this. A big chunk of that white ledger stone, white marble, Arctic white, you can find it at Lowe's in the tile section, and I bought a box of those, and I'm just using that to kind of block out the sun from any little areas where grass wants to crop up. And after a couple weeks, obviously the grass is dead and I can move it to the next spot. So we'll see how that works. But the theme is everything white, and that's not for color reasons. That is to reflect the sunlight and keep the ground cool, because I do not want to roast the roots of my conifers under baking hot rocks that retain the sun's heat all night long. So far, it seems to be working. And actually, it seems like the trees have gotten a lot darker green as a result of it. For example, this Wilson spruce here, it used to be kind of a light lime green color for as long as I had it in the ground over the course of 2 or 3 years. And then after ripping away all the grass and putting rock, it's taken on this really nice dark green. And it's not just the color contrast. You can look, the needles are a nice dark green. So I think the stones are working and they're reflecting the sun's light away from the ground and actually onto the foliage of the evergreens. So they're getting even more sun, even if they're in part shade, because it's bouncing up from the ground. So this could actually be a strategy if you have an area where you need to plant a tree that needs a lot of sun, but it's not full sun location. White rocks that reflect the light back up onto the tree can increase the total amount of solar radiation reaching the plant. We'll see what happens. But that was just an accident if that happened. The main goal was to block the grass.